Good morning. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Welcome, welcome. So I was just told, in the back, come out, be more energized, amped up than you normally are. And I just had two friends 2 minutes ago say, dude, you got to calm down. So I don't know what's going to happen up here. I am really amped. It's exciting to be here. This is the first in-person event. I don't know how many people share the same thing. First one I've done in a year and a half after traveling a lot for years and years. So it's been really weird. I really didn't know how to pack. I was not sure what's business casual. Does it include sweatpants? Is it slippers? I have done a lot of talks in like shorts and a button down over the last few years. So it's kind of fun to get dressed up again. I have been at Sustainable Brands a long time. We were talking about this. Sandy last night said she's been at every single one. We think Annie might have, Annie Longsworth. I think I've been to 13 or 14 of them. I spoke at the first one, which just makes me old now. It's really exciting to see what this has become and how many people were able to make it in person. So I'm just excited to see all of you here. So this is the second day, the first real morning. Want to remind people online to use Hopin. Is that how you pronounce it? And we got the hashtag SB21 San Diego on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and any of your other special social media platforms. We, of course, have to thank, and it wouldn't be possible to be here without the support of the presenting sponsor, Nestle, the lead sponsors, Amazon, Tetra Pak, Verizon, and all of our other sponsors and partners. You can see the signs around with their names. We want to say hello to the virtual participants. I think there's about 3,000 that have been signed up. I don't know how many are on right now. We want to thank, there's a virtual event live stream sponsor, CVS, and Buck the Cubicle, for helping make this hybrid event possible, which is great. I think we've all discovered hybrid events work better than we thought they did. Also South Pole, who's the renewable energy and carbon offsets partner for this event, and Bonneville Environmental Foundation, the water restoration partner, and they're helping reduce the footprint of the whole thing for all of us. So let's give everyone a round of applause, all those sponsors. Thank you. We have a theme today, product, service, and business model innovation for regeneration. There's a lot in that. I think we're going to hear some. I know a lot of the people speaking, don't know some of them. I'm excited to hear what they have to say. I'm also going to speak a little this morning, excited to hear what I have to say, not sure yet. We're going to lay out some of the most promising types of innovation for regeneration. We certainly need that. New business models, regenerative agriculture, carbon negative products, retail practices, consumer engagement for regeneration, and lots of initiatives tackling the social side of regeneration in supply chains. So everything, basically. We're covering the full realm of what companies have to do in the world. So I think last night, Cohen was talking about some of her favorite authors, and it seems like everyone brought a book with them. So I have as well. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But I was really, if we could bring up my slides. Thank you. I was reflecting a lot, and I didn't come here really just to talk about a book, but I was reflecting a lot about the last couple years as I came for the first time live. And I realized that I used to do talks and tried to be funny, somewhat tried to provide some humor. Annie Longsworth, if you've ever seen her MC, she kind of always brings the funny. And I realized that my talks over the last year and a half are just not as funny. And part of that's, as we speak on Zoom, you kind of can't see each other. It's kind of hard to make jokes work. And just the reality that we're not in a funny time. We just aren't. And I think we heard last night a lot about that and a lot about what we all bring to this and really how hard the last 18 months have been and continue to be. And, I think those of us who have struggled with depression, anxiety, those things, this has been hard, right? It's raised the temperature. I've watched my kids struggle with this. So I don't think of this as a funny time. But I think it's a time of hope, that we can build something better, of connection, so which is why it's so amazing to be in a room with people again, connection, and some positive thoughts about where we're headed, that we can build something better. So I want to just set the stage, what I think has been going on in the last couple years. So right before, I guess it was right after we last met, so it was summer of 2019, there was this statement from the Business Roundtable, and I think a lot of you know about this. The 180 CEOs of the largest companies in America put out this statement that the meaning of business, the purpose of business, was not what they had said it was for many years, which was to just serve shareholders that actually there was a larger purpose. They were serving stakeholders. That's what they've been doing all along. Now, many of you represent those companies. We could have really good debates about what did this mean? What did the statement really mean? How much did companies really follow through on it? Did the CEOs even fully understand what they were saying? Because the B Corp organization instantly ran ads saying, welcome to B Corp. You've basically said you're a B Corp. I'm not sure they meant that. And we could talk about, have they backed it up lately in policy advocacy, especially around the budget and reconciliation bill? There's huge gaps. But I think rhetoric matters. And I think this was a huge kick to the conversation about stakeholder capitalism instead of shareholder capitalism. And it wasn't just CEOs. You were seeing the Financial Times launching a site about capitalism needing a reset. You saw investors talking more and more, surveys showing investors saying there's more than just financial return. Larry Fink, of course, the largest investor in the world, $9 trillion under management, has said every January in his letter to CEOs, you got to think about ESG. And he went even further at the beginning of this year and said, everybody will be profoundly affected by the move to a net zero world. The companies that aren't preparing for this are going to lose valuation. They're going to suffer. And then in the middle of this, the pandemic. And I know there's people in the room who have lost people. We've all had pain and watched pain. But I hope there's some things we take away from it, some learnings, both good and bad. And one is this deep connection. And we really need this. This is a picture of the peak day in air travel in world history. It was a couple years before the pandemic, something like 220,000 flights. This partly explains how we ended up with a global pandemic, quite literally. We are connected, and we all share one immune system. I think we've learned that. We are all in the world, all of us, doing the same things, having to wear masks, having to be distant, having to find this way. And so this was a way to connect. But I also believe that we started to see some more humanity. We started to understand that things don't just appear in the store, that there's somebody growing it, picking it, shipping it, packaging it, selling it to us. And we started calling these people essential workers while still debating whether they deserve a minimum wage. I mean, insane, right? We're all, the knowledge workers of us that could work at home were because these people were working the front lines. And then we learned that there was fragility in our system. This is the millions of gallons of milk that was just dumped because it wasn't in the right box, because it was in the wrong channel. We saw that with toilet paper. We're still having problems. We built a system for efficiency, not resilience, right? We didn't build a diverse system. We built one where you make something the most you can do in one place at the lowest price, and then if something happens to that, the whole system is screwed up. But I think companies did step up when the pandemic started. There were a lot that made mistakes, but many, many stood up. And one of my favorite stories was Medtronic just sharing the design of ventilators because Ford and Tesla and others said they wanted to help and build them. And believe it or not, a car plant is not made to make ventilators. So they needed the designs. They needed help. But what I take away from all this is that in the last 2 years, I think more has changed in what it means to be a business and the expectations of business than I've seen in the 20 years that I've been in this. I think far more. We are accelerating. And I think sustainability has a broader and broader meaning. It is about the role of business in society. That's what leaders, CEOs, companies have to answer to. And I think at the core, what that is a question about who are you? Call it purpose, whatever you want. And who do you really serve? Are you serving just shareholders? Or are you serving the world? And I think we heard this last night, so I will do this point very quickly, which is fitting, that we are accelerating. The world is accelerating. We heard last night about a VUCA world. It's a phrase we use in my new book, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous, all true. I'd also add that there's more and more exponential happening. We've gotten to this place because exponential growth of population, of emissions, of CO2 in the atmosphere now, exponential use of land, exponential growth in many ways. And we are facing now existential threats. As the Secretary General said, climate is now code red for humanity. Their latest report was not good. It was dire. We have a serious problem. We're seeing rapid continuing growth in inequality. And it's not that there weren't always rich and poor. The system has that. We get that. It's that over the last 40 years in the developed world, and especially in America, all of the wealth, all of the income gains went to the 1% and even to the 0.1%. A RAND study said that if the inequality level had stayed the same from 40 years ago, The middle or the bottom 90% would have gotten $50 trillion more dollars. Salary, middle range salary would have been $100,000 instead of $50,000. That's a lot of quality of life. And this income inequality is gender and racial inequality. Right? A Hispanic woman in the US makes 58% of what a white man does for the same job. And we're seeing acceleration in attacks on democracy. The coup is not over. It is continuing. It is continuing at the state level, and it's building. This is a very dangerous time. So I believe companies have a pretty important role to try to protect our democracy. But there's exponential growth in really cool ways. What's happened in the clean tech explosion, I think, has surprised even industry experts. This is, even in 2020, corporate purchases of renewables, many of the people in the room have done this, not utilities, this is just companies buying renewables for their business, is up again. This is an exponential curve. 23 gigawatts last year, that's like 23 nuclear plants, that's a lot. And the explosion on the EV side, basically every large auto company in the world has now committed to move away from internal combustion engines. Daimler has said they will no longer invest in R&D in combustion engines. That's it. That's it. And this is the Ford F-150, the best-selling vehicle in the world for 40 years. And it's coming out in EV at the beginning of next year. They're saying they're going right to the heart of it. We believe people will enjoy a truck that's EV. We're seeing generational change, thank God. The attitudes about what it means to be a business, what they expect from business. And half of US millennials say that they have already spoken up to support or criticize their employer. So what happens when Gen Z gets into the workforce? I have 2 teenagers. I'm terrified and also excited. I just sent one to college. If anybody wants to commiserate, it's an incredibly strange feeling. But as my co-author in my new book says, there's a lot of Gretas out there. Every organization has a Greta Thunberg, and we should listen to them. The transparency that's expected in the world is growing, accelerating, and a McKinsey study said that in a transparent world, especially younger consumers, they don't distinguish between your business and the suppliers. It's a system. And you will be hit by whatever happens. You are responsible for whatever happens anywhere. And something is changing finally, I think, on the consumer side. One of my favorite statistics I've heard in the last couple years was a Google exec saying that when searching for products, people use the word sustainable 10 times more in 2020 than in 2015. That's something. That's something. And Google, if you saw, just launched tools. They said one of their ways of helping was to help 1 billion people make greener choices. Travel that has a lower footprint, products they think has a lower footprint, they're going to help. So I think where we are is the end of the beginning. Whatever sports metaphor you want to use, we finished the first inning. Those of us in this field for a long time, everyone's at the table finally. There is no large company in the world that doesn't have a sustainability report, goals on carbon and emissions and water and waste, a sustainability person now, or at least someone with that in their job. They're all at the table and at a huge range of experience and expectations about this. That's good. But what all of this acceleration means is that we have to go faster, much, much faster. It's not enough to be less bad anymore. Business has to step up. It has to step up. And so that's part of the reason that I spent the last 2 years. It worked out in a way to be kind of locked in my room. I had just agreed to write this book with Paul Pullman, who was the CEO of Unilever for a decade and now runs a group called Imagine. And we're pushing for a kind of different level of ambition. Call it regenerative, call it net positive. I don't actually really care about the language that much. It's about ambition. And we're defining a net positive business as one that improves the well-being for everybody that it impacts. All employees, consumers, customers, suppliers, communities, and at every scale, right? Every product, every service, every factory, every country you operate in. This is the North Star. There is nobody there yet, right? And that's weird to say, here's a book about net positive that nobody's at yet. Okay, and no one can claim Unilever is there. But the fundamental question we're asking, and then we ask people to ask themselves is the world better off because your company is in it? Is it better off? And what are the core principles of this kind of business? Aside from the regular principles of running a good business, at core it's about ownership. It is responsibility for your impacts across in every dimension, and I will come back to that in a second. It is about the long-term value creation for multiple stakeholders, serving all stakeholders, serving the world, and then shareholders. It's worth mentioning shareholders, investors matter, but shareholders are served by serving stakeholders for the long haul. And because of the scale of our problems, we can only solve them in enormous collaborations. Partnership is core to this, and it's really core to the book and the message of the book. So that's the fifth principle. Now, I want to talk a little bit about this ownership idea. We have a model of nested circles. I mean, I've done 2x2s because I worked at BCG at the beginning of my career, nested circles. There's only so many ways to talk about these things, but most of the people in this room know the greenhouse gas protocol that says when you're looking at your carbon emissions, there's 3 levels. Your direct emissions, the purchased emissions from the grid, and your supply chain and customer emissions. And that's the protocol. But there's been a number of other people that we kind of looked at and leveraged that have said, well, there's more levels of influence or of effect. And we reached out to a couple people in the room, my friend Daniel Aronson in the room, who puts values on things that are hard to value, and asked him and said, what do you think of these circles? We're trying to expand this. So just on emissions, there's the sector. This is why you're seeing these conversations about how do we build a circular or regenerative model that isn't just one company. You can't do that alone. It has to be the sector. There's your role in policy. This has been probably the biggest shift in my work, and what I write and talk about is advocacy. Again, the bill going through Congress, expected to go through Congress, is the first largest plan to spend anything on climate. And frankly, almost every company is being silent, is letting the US Chamber and others try to kill it because there's a rollback of corporate taxes. I think that's unacceptable. And I think you have to, thank you. It's easy for me to say, I just write, I pontificate. But it's unacceptable when you've got companies, and there was a great session yesterday on corporate political responsibility, and the companies that pulled back funding for the Congress people that supported insurrection, and they were talking about the things they don't fund, but I don't think almost any company has really put climate up there to say it's unacceptable to fund things that are against climate action. But then at the largest level, say you're a consumer products company, is just your role in consumption, right? Your role in the level of the use of the world's resources. And are we still a fossil-based, fuel-based society? So you can do this thinking for carbon, but also do it for social issues, governance issues. So imagine you're a food company, and you want to look at your employee well-being. You think about the people that are affected, and there's safety at the core. There's well-being of the employee and their whole selves. But then if you extend further, there's the food and farm workers and their well-being. There's the communities. Are they thriving? And there's supporting the kinds of policies that lead to regenerative agriculture, not just agreements in this room, but the policies that help that, and the policies that help with nutrition and reduce food waste. And at the largest level, what do you do to help with hunger, with the fact that we have to feed what will be 9 billion people within the thresholds of the planet? Now, I remember being a kid when, it depends on your age, but I remember the population being 5 billion when I was in elementary school. And I remember hitting 6 and 7. We're about to hit 8, right? It's a huge number. So the core question is, what are the problems you can help solve? So I'm not going to go into the details because I'm sure you're all buying it on ebook right now, the Kindle. But the progression that we propose in the book is really starting with yourself. It's starting with actual courage. And I highlight in the book Ken Frazier, who, when a president basically said there's fine people in this group of neo-Nazis and anti-Semites, Ken Frazier and Merck said, I have to leave this presidential CEO group. I can't do it anymore. That was courageous. And what we need is courageous leaders who have purpose and duty and empathy. They come from a place of humility. These are kind of the 5 core attributes of the leader that we talk about in the book. The ability to say, I don't know. When we put out those big goals out there, you say to the world, I don't know exactly how to do this. We're going to be 0 carbon by 2030. Leaders need to be inspiring, and they need to seek partnership. And so I'll just leave you with kind of the core of the book, which is a few examples of the kinds of partnerships we need. And they vary in size and this kind of the goals of them. There's kind of tactical partnerships where companies come together in their sector and find efficiencies together. They're kind of optimizing the current system. Or they experiment with new models like the loop system. We have consumer products companies trying out ways to avoid packaging. If you don't know this, you get a box, you order products, you get the packaging, and it gets reused. You send it back. They reuse the packaging. One of the most successful partnerships with the NGO community, I think really in corporate history, is the Unilever-UNICEF partnership on hand washing. And this will sound just like philanthropy, but I want to tell you the part of the story that I wasn't as familiar with going into this, even though I've looked at Unilever for many years. And it's The fact that they have worked with UNICEF and reached 1 billion people now, teaching kids about hand washing using the Lifebuoy soap brand from Unilever. And they have helped 1 billion people learn about this and have saved millions of lives. Okay, that sounds like philanthropy, but there's also been this incredible innovation driver because they realize there's not enough water in some of these places, and kids are kids, so they get antsy. So they developed a version that killed 99.9% of the germs in 10 seconds instead of 30 and changed color. So the kids were like, I'm done. All right? And they brought this to other products. This is what we talk about in the book is growth, value from values. This is win-win. That's okay. Not everything's win-win. But it's okay that this brand now grows at double digits after 100 years. It was a pretty stagnant brand, and it's growing at double digits a year for like 8 or 9 years now, which for soap is like torrid growth, right? It's a billion euro brand for them now. And then one of the core stories in the book, and I learned a lot about this, is about palm oil. And palm oil is really the connection in the middle of every issue we have. It is one of the major sources, the deforestation that puts carbon in the atmosphere. There's deep connections to poverty issues and inequality. And this has been big companies, all the big buyers in the room have been trying to get to sustainable palm oil for 12, 13 years. And they buy sustainable palm oil, but it's mostly a failure in terms of how much deforestation there is. And they admit this. It hasn't worked. But in the last few years, there's been some successes. And we're finally seeing reductions in deforestation rates because the whole system was finally at the table. It wasn't just the big buyers, which even as big as they are, Unilever is the largest buyer of palm oil in the world, but only buys 3%. It was also having the municipalities, the local smallholder farmers, thousands of them. They're doing this thing at this jurisdictional level. That's what they're called, the jurisdictional approach. World Economic Forum's involved, but they also brought in finance. There was a fund started from the Norwegian Sovereign Fund and Unilever and others so that you could finance farmers to move to species and practices that were twice as productive so they didn't have to cut down more land. They needed the financing to do this. Same thing happens in the kind of transition to organic. You have to have everyone at the table. This is hard. This is really hard work. What I learned was this is difficult, but we're finally finding the ways to do this. And this is how you get to healthy forests that protect animals and protect the people in them so they have good business as well. So I ask everyone to think about this, that you can't thrive. Business cannot thrive unless people and planet thrive. So I ask you to think about how will you and your business be net positive. And I want to bring up now a short video from my co-author who could not be here but wanted to say a few words.
Well, hello everybody. Thank you for inviting Andrew and me, and I wish I could be there in person. First of all, congratulations to the Sustainable Brand community for all the hard work you're doing to create a more regenerative world. Andrew undoubtedly has told you about the need for change. And yes, we need it with speed and scale. And some of the ideas that made us write the book Net Positive. We wrote it because we believe the time has come to accelerate the transformation of the private sector. And yes, by all means, that is within reach, putting business in greater service of the world. We want this book to be a catalyst for a broader movement. We're finding the accelerators who are on board. We're working to mobilize youth groups, redesign higher education, collaborate with NGOs and civil society, assemble industry and trade groups, and many, many more. We know that systems transformation is never easy, but it is possible, certainly when people who give life to these systems are actually willing and find the courage to change. Courage, as you know, comes from the French word cœur or heart. And the net positive journey starts with looking at ourselves, our personal purpose, and our willingness to do the harder rights versus the easier wrongs. We invite you all to join this movement. The opportunities here are profound and rewarding. Together, we can lead the way to a better future for all and a new paradigm for business. After all, the solutions to our global crisis lie in empathy, in compassion, in systems thinking, and in collective action. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. And I will tell you, he is completely genuine in his obsession with etymology. He says things like, you all know the French for heart is cœur. I mean, that's a normal conversation with Paul. It has been a real journey for me to work with him for the last couple years. We come from different perspectives. He's incredibly Dutch and blunt. I'm incredibly Jewish and blunt, so we've kind of crossed that barrier. But I hope the result is the kind of thing that we want it to be, which is an inspiration. And we're serious about trying to create a movement. So I do invite everyone to visit us at netpositive.world. We don't have all the solutions. People ask me, how are you going to do X? I'm like, you tell me. Like we need, this is part of our mission and part of what we talk about, the ability to say, I don't know. I don't know how we're going to change all of curriculum in business schools and undergrad, but I know we need to. Right? Not just change a class and have them use one of our books, but change the curriculum at a very core level. Those are the kinds of things we're working on. We have a couple young millennials on staff who make us feel old, but are really trying to mobilize the youth world, and it's been really great. So please join.